Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jai Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa Purudikacharya Ashtoto the Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Purudikacharya Ashtoto the Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Now, this door can be opened. And I don't have that great hearing, but I do not hear the fans going. You see, when those fans go and it pulls in air, it also improves the circulation. But they're very important for sucking up any COVID that may accumulate. So it's a very important protection we have. Okay, yeah, that's the sound I'm looking for. All right. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. Now, where are we? 26? 27? Okay. Right. Okay. On this third day of August 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 13 entitled Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Text number 27 on page 559. Naveen, give that stand there. You can use the stand? Okay. Oh, there you go. Oh, she's got a super stand. Okay. All right. Text number 27. Yavat Sanjayate Kinchit Sattvam Stavara Jangamam Chaitra Chaitragya Sangyogat Tadvidhi Bharatarshapha Yavat sanjayate kinchit Sattvang sthavara jangamam Chaitra chaitragya sanyogat Tadvidhi bharatarshaba Yavat sanjayate kinchit Sattvam sthavara jangamam Chaitra chaitragya sanyogat Tadvidhi bharatarshaba. Go ahead, chant. Yavat sanjayate kinchit Sattvam sthavara jangamam Chaitra chaitragya sanyogat Tadvidhi bharatarshaba. Yavat sanjayate kinchit Sattvam sthavara jangamam Chaitra chaitragya sanyogat Tadvidhi bharatarshaba. Yavat sanjayate kinchit Sattvam sthavara jangamam Chaitra chaitragya sanyogat Tadvidhi bharatarshaba. Ladies, you want to try it? Not yet. Okay. I'll read this word by words. Yavat, whatever, sanjayate, comes into being, kinchit, anything, tattvam, existence, sthavara, not moving, jangamam, moving, chaitra, of the body, chaitragya, and the knower of the body, sangyogat, by the union between. Tadvidhi, you must know it, Bharata Rishabha, O chief of the Bharatas. Translation. O chief of the Bharatas, know that whatever you see in existence, both the moving and the non-moving, is only a combination of the field of activities and the knower of the field. Report. Both material nature and the living entity, which were existing before the creation of the cosmos, are explained in this verse. Whatever is created is but a combination of the living entity and the material nature. There are many manifestations like trees, mountains, and hills which are not moving, and there are many existences which are moving, and all of them are but combinations of the material nature and the superior nature, the living entity. Without the touch of the superior nature, the living entity, nothing can grow. The relationship between material nature and spiritual nature is eternally going on, and this combination is effected by the Supreme Lord. Therefore, He is the controller of both the superior and inferior natures. The material nature is created by Him, and the superior nature is placed in this material nature, and thus all these activities and manifestations take place. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, whatever exists. Now, when I first read this, I was thinking, well, what about, like the mountain? What about all the things that we know as inanimate in this world? Well, they're made up of these 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. They may not have mind and intelligence, but they're certainly made of those things. And as we know from the Vedic literature, there are devas in charge. There's a god of the waters, there's certainly a god of the air, Vayu. There is a goddess of the earth, Bhumi, sun god, earth, water, fire, air, ether. I'm not sure who's the god of the ether. But they're in charge of all these things. In other words, the ocean is moving and doing its thing because Varuna is sanctioning. He's making it happen. So in this way also, even the things that aren't clearly part of organisms like we are, they're also combinations of the Chaitra and the Chaitragya. Now this harkens all the way back to the beginning of the chapter. Once again, the 6 questions of Arjuna what is the Prakriti, what is the Purusha, what is nature, what is the living entity enjoying in nature, what is the Kshetra and Kshetragya, what is the field and the knower of the field, and it turns out there's two knowers of the field, of each field, the individual soul and the super soul, and what is knowledge and what is the goal of knowledge. So Krishna has just finished discussing this goal of knowledge, which turns out to be the super soul who's non-different from Krishna. So the goal of all the knowledge that we are gleaning from the books of the Shastra, the scripture, is to gain more and more faith and understanding about what actually is going on in this world. Who are we? What do we consist of? Where do we come from? What is this world? What's the source of it all? And what's the relationship between all of those things? Now, one may ask, well, how does this relate to going back to Godhead and joining Krishna in his internal Leela in the spiritual world, which is, after all, our ultimate goal? Isn't that the goal that we're looking for? Yes, it is. But to get to that point, from where we are now, we need to deepen our faith in Krishna, in Krishna's words, in his representatives, all of these divine things that we've been given. And that faith is deepened by understanding the philosophy. I just heard a lecture. I hear every morning. I listen to Prabhupada when I get up and make ready to come to the temple. And he was speaking there about how in the Western Bible, we have God created earth in 6 days, let there be light, all of these different things, which is in the basic ballpark of what happened. But with the modern scientific mind, we want more of that. We want to understand, well, how did it all happen? And that's what you get. I remember reading in the third canto, Kapila Dev's teachings, the latter part of the third canto, beginning text, chapter 25. Last night we were discussing the beginning of those instructions to his mother in the form of the Saru Sangashtaka, some of you recall. But then he goes on and he describes the movements of the living entities, the workings of material energy, how each one of the different material elements is gradually manifest from the interaction of the false ego with the modes of nature. The interaction of the mode of nature of the false ego with the mode of goodness produces the mind, and with the mode of passion produces the intelligence, and with the mode of ignorance produces all of the different elements, beginning with the most subtle, the ether, and then the air, and then the fire and water and earth, like that. And all of these combine to form the myriad living entities and the so-called inanimate things of this world. And there's always not just one, but many observers, many higher beings which are making everything happen, overseeing. Ultimately, God, in the form of the Supersoul. In every atom and in every heart, He's there. And don't forget that very important verse. What is the basic nature of the Supersoul? Upadrashta anumantacha bhota bhokta maheshwara. Upadrashta means he's seeing everything, overseeing. And anumanta means he's permitting, he's sanctioning. When we want to do something, we just grab some water. What's the big deal? Well, what had to happen in order for that to actually go on? This machine of the body is going on from moment to moment. Eventually it breaks down, we know that. But there's a nervous system, there's the brain, it's sending out impulses. The desire to drink the water, that comes from the body, and the soul understands that through the mechanism of the brain, and all this stuff's going on. And then I want the water. So all I'm doing in this body is desiring, right? I want water. Okay, so that information goes to the super soul, who is then in control of all the demigods, who then moving the complicated muscle that like this, pick this up and like this. Every little thing we do, and all the things we don't do by will, are also being, the heart is beating, the lungs are working nicely.
The microphone is off. Someone.
God.
No, it's turned on now. I think the battery probably needs to be changed.
All right, I'll lose the other. I'm going to use the other one. Okay. Hare Krishna. All
Yes,
right.
Prabhu, it's good.
All right. So there's millions of the things, autonomic nervous system. I mean, to learn about it is incredible, you know, doctors. And it's all going on. We just take it for granted. But then something happens, you get sick, you know. Oh, you know, I have no appetite, I have no energy, you know. This is all going on under the aegis, if you will, under the supervision of the Supersoul. So remembering that we're not alone, that there are these higher powers, higher forces, higher realities that exist. This opens up a whole new realm of reality.
Yeah, it got turned off again. I think the battery has turned out probably.
Hare Krishna. It only works for remotely, though. That's the problem. I get it. I guess if it goes off again, you're going to have to come up here and sit and give the class. Hare Krishna. So anyway, to make a long story short, compress. So these, we can never understand fully how this is going on. It's so complex. But the good news is we don't need to. When we understand that Krishna expands into various expansions which eventually come down to the Super Soul, and that therefore he's present at all times with us. We're never bereft of Krishna's association. We've forgotten him, but he never forgets us. He never forgets. And this is really an expression, and this is so important, because bhakti ultimately means loving exchange, loving service to Krishna, and he reciprocates by allowing us to serve him and serving us in so many ways. So, but there's so many foundations for our faith that help us to practice, because this concept of conditioning, we've been in this material world for who knows how many births, and we've picked up so many habits. It's like instinctive to be fearful of so many things. You know, in the climate, so many dangers come. We see animals; they're programmed for that. Prabhupada would give the example of the birds. The birds sometimes they come down. Where I grew up, we had robins who would come down, and you'd see they would hop around on the lawn, you know, looking for somehow they can hear where the worms are, you know, and then they would beak down. But as soon as they get a worm, they up. Oh, someone coming to get me, you know. And if there's any hint of a cat, you know, or something, boom, off they go, fly into the air, you know, fight or flight. So this principle, Prabhupada always say, well, we share all these things with the animals, and the birds, and the beasts, and the insects. Eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Right? We all eat, and there's some form of reproduction, mating, you know. Even the trees have something going on with the seeds and everything. And defense is there. Except for the poor trees, they really can't defend. All they've got is that bark, and if it gets breached, you know, somehow they surrender. They can't do anything. But all the animals, the moving beings, they can flee. They have some kind of claws, whatever, you know, stinger, whatever, you know, whoever, somehow. And so eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So we share this. So what do we have that's different? Who remembers the verse? You should know this. First, he lists the four things we share. Ahara, eating. Nidra, sleeping. Bhaya, fearing, defending. And maitunat means the sex life, reproduction. Ahara, nidra, bhaya, maitunang cha. Samanyametat pashubi naranam. Human beings and the animals, we share these four things. So what's the differentiation? Dharma. Dharma is so important. Dharma is in human society, which is a system of activity for elevation. Now, oftentimes, Dharma is used, it's not the absolute Dharma, but it's Dharma in, say, Varnashram Dharma, which is not necessarily centered on Krishna, organizing life for elevation. And therefore you find these four purusharthas, goals of human life: dharma, artha, kama, moksha. That some of you have heard this already. You'll see it again and again. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Now, in this configuration, dharma is not the absolute dharma that we're trying to practice to achieve the ultimate good. That's real dharma, spoken of in Bhagavatam. But this dharma at least keeps you as a human being. In other words, is regulation you accept, and you can advance not just to a better birth in this plane, but even to go to heaven. And so there's a whole section of the Vedas which is really longer even.
I think the battery ran out. Prabhu.
Testing.
Yeah, it's working.
Last green. Somebody's got to be in charge of these batteries. Meanwhile, you put a new battery in that one. We'll keep going. Hare Krishna. So where was I? Dharma. Very important. So, Dharma, Prabhupada call this not religion, but religiosity. You know? Like you get this truth and truthiness. Is that still current? That I think that it's kind of like truth. You know about that. It sounds like truth, but it's not real truth. So this is dharma, is regulation, careful, paying the priests, having sacrifices, all for material elevation. But Krishna makes it very clear in the Bhagavad Gita. Can you hear me? What's going on? Okay. That's a fool's errand. Even if you get up to heaven and you go to Indraloka, where there's much more facility for enjoyment than here. You live much longer, you don't get old, and there's all kinds of facilities, there's no climate change, it's just wonderful, for a while. It can be a long time, but it's not permanent. So Krishna says, Te tam bhukva swargalokam vishalam. In heaven, you enjoy these godly delights, but then, chine punye matyalokam vishanti. When your piety is used up, you get like pious credits. It's just like money in the bank for a credit card. So you work, and you build up, and now we can go on vacation. Let's go to Hawaii, You got your credit cards, carefully guard, your ticket. So you go, you're swimming, you're enjoying, you're surfing, and, you're in a hot hotel, or a cruise before COVID. That's great. And, but then what happens? I gave this example. So there comes a point where you're trying to buy something with that credit card, and I said, "Oh, Mr. Jones, sorry, your credit card has been spit out. Do you have another one?" I said, "No, I don't have another one." "Well, you'll have to go back to work." Then he goes back to work. So similarly, after your pious credit is called punya, is used up. Chine punye, exhausted credit, piety. Martya lokam vishanti. Krishna doesn't mince words. There's no time. Gita is it's like a battle is about to begin. So, chine punye matya lokam vishanti, you come down again to this world of death. He reminds you what the real reality is. So even if you are, through all these austerities, you go up, you have to come down again. You didn't make any progress. You wasted all that time trying to enjoy. So what is the real dharma? Now, I spoke about this recently. This is, the Bhagavatam is all about that. Second verse, dharma projita kaitavotra. Here in this Bhagavatam, here, atra means here, we're throwing away, casting away, far away, cheating dharma, called kaitava dharma. Means that you think you're doing the right thing, the best you can do for yourself, but you're being cheated because it's material, and that keeps you bound up to material life. And you take birth again, you don't know what happens, you get entangled, you can lose the human form of life. You've wasted time. Material life means wasting time, especially human life. It's a special gift. It's very rare. We've come up through so many species, now we're in the human form of life. Labdva sudurlabhamidam bahusambhavande manushyam. After many, many births, labdva sudurlam, you've attained the rare human form of life, which, although temporary like all other forms, it's artadam. You can get the actual good, the shreya. You call it nikshreya, the ultimate good. Not the temporary, some material good, whether go to heaven, go to Brahmaloka. You still have to come down. but that getting out entirely of the bondage of birth and death and returning back to God, back to home, back to Godhead, for an eternal life of bliss and knowledge. Unheard of in this plane. That's the promise. Now you can say, well, that sounds like a pie in the sky. You mean I have to give up illicit sex and gambling and meeting, and I have to give up my life, basically, for this pie in the sky? I can't believe it. Let me go out and go to the bar. That's where the books come in. That's where the Acharya comes in. That's where the examples come in. Of even on this plane, you can see people who are equipoise. This was Prabhupada when he came. How was he going to attract Westerners? The fruit of the hippie era, whose lives were built on intoxication and illicit sex, basically, to this esoteric, austere practice. His main attraction was himself. You could see he was living on a different plane. He was living in a Bowery in the same place I'm living, but he's in a blissful, spiritual, peaceful position. And his words, and of course the chanting, if you just listened, if you just heard, it had a tremendous salutary effect on you. And if you participated in the chanting, then you really make quick advancement. And there were enough, that first crew who would be able to come attracted and actually work and follow the process because they had faith in him. And as books were there, they had their first canto, and gradually more books manifested. And so on the basis of that knowledge and the practice, you can actually be practicing the highest yoga right here in San Diego or depths of New York, where I joined. So, back to our verse. Here is simply saying that everything we see, including ourselves, is a combination of the Chaitra and Chaitragya. And always remember that Chaitragya means twofold. There's the individual soul and the super soul. So when we see everything, we should understand that. We should remember Krishna's there in everything. He's in every atom. And any entity we see, when the trees, the birds, any of the driving the cars, is a living entity there driving, and there's the super soul. And if we remember that, we'll always be thinking of Krishna. And there's so many ways in the Bhagavad Gita to help us think of Krishna. And now we're going to ask for a question. Go ahead.
So there's that verse in Bhagavad Gita, Prakrite Kriyamanani. And I was wondering, because in that verse it's saying that the living entity thinks himself the doer due to the influence of the false ego. He thinks himself the doer of activities which are actually carried out by the modes of material nature. But from your example of desiring water,
Yeah.
You said the desire goes to the super soul, and then the super soul communicates with the different demigods which move the limbs. And
Yeah, right.
so I was wondering how much of it is super soul, how much of it is the modes of material nature? Because I know also the super soul has somewhat of a role in dishing us out our karma.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how we kind of compromise those things and how.
Well,
this,
how much of it is super soul? It's all the super soul, because that's Krishna. But how it works? It's difficult to visualize. But oftentimes we get a very graphic demonstration of how the demigods, who are much more powerful than we are, imagine being in control of all the weather, all the storms going on and everything. Indra, that's his power, and he's the king of heaven, But he is also completely under the control of material energy, and when he forgets his position as a servant of Krishna, in the famous Govardhan Leela, for which this place is named, then he makes huge mistakes, and then he has to be chastised and so then he offers his beautiful prayers. But the thing about Indra, then a little while later, Krishna goes up to the heavenly planets with Satyabhama after killing Narakasura, the big demon, and he had stolen her earrings somehow. Aditi is the mother of the demigods. So he's come to return those, and while he's up there, Satyabhama does a little shopping, I guess I would say, and she sees the Parijata tree, wonderful Parijata tree, which one of her rival queens, Rukmini, has in her garden. And so she says, "Oh, Krishna, please get me the Parijata tree." So he's just, come all the way up to heaven and return those earrings. And everyone is very happy to get them back. And here's Krishna. But Indra says no. How can he say no? But he says no, and there's actually a fight. I mean, it's not a fight to the death, obviously. And Shukadev Goswami takes the opportunity to berate Indra at that point. I don't know if when you read the... what is with this Indra? Doesn't he remember from one to the next, But this is the role of the modes of nature. The demigods are not out of the modes of nature. That's why there's no real security up there. Because you have all these demons. They also have their planets. And Bali gets it together, and Indra offends his guru, and then they lose the heavenly planets, and they have to go begging the Krishna, please let us. So he advised him, you go to the Dichi and beg for his bones. Really? Here's this wonderful sage meditating, we have to beg for his bones, so we can make a special enhanced thunderbolt for Indra. But they want their kingdoms back, so they go do that, And the Dichi first is kind of joking with him, says, I can't give you my bones, my body, are you kidding me? But then he says, all right, no problem. Because he knows he's not his body, he's very... So they actually make, a thunderbolt out of the bones. So it's just a lot of struggle. This is mentioned by one of the 9 Yogendras. These 9 Yogendras are great. They come one on the stage, one after another, and give lessons. A concise lesson of 10 or 11 verses, And there's one verse that's, if you get into shlokas, this is, you say, this is an important shloka. It's one of the shlokas that describes how important it is to find a qualified guru. So the verse goes like this: Tasmad guru papadeda jigyashu shreya uttamam shabdepadep nishnatam brahmanupashamashayam. If you want the ultimate shreya, you remember I used that term? That term keeps coming up. Shreya and nikshreya. The good and the ultimate good. The ultimate good. Not these relative material goods. This is fool's gold. You know what fool's gold? It looks like gold and you get into it, you may pay a lot of money for it, and you say, oh, I was cheated. So Maya is into cheating us. It's her thankless task to test to see if we're going to fall for her tricks or if we're going to stick with the Shastra. So there's prayas and shreyas. The prayas is the immediate good, material good, which you may aspire for and dream about and write about and hear about and actually attain. But then when you get it, it doesn't stay. It doesn't help you solve your main problem, birth, old age, disease, and death. So this verse says, Tasmat, Guru Papadeta. Therefore, surrender unto a guru, Jigyashu, if you're interested in the ultimate good. Now, what is the qualifications of the guru? Shabde. He is steeped in the Shastra. Pare is short for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Shanishnatam, complete faith and confidence through knowledge, experience, devotion like that. Brahman Nupashamashayam, completely absorbed in these two aspects of Brahman, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the transcendental word of the Lord in the form of Gita and the other Shastra. That's the Shabde. And Upashamashayam, absolutely free of any desire to be entangled, to enjoy sense gratification. Now, I was curious because I knew this verse for years. What comes before? Because the verse begins with therefore. Right? So I looked it up, and it's one of these 9 Yogendras, and there's several verses before. And in a few verses, he proves that there's no point in aspiring for any material happiness. And first he begins with the standard thing of just, having a family and all this stuff. And he says, one should see that all one's aspirations for maximizing one's happiness and minimizing one's suffering are ultimately frustrated. And ultimately, you're lying in that bed and you're about to die and you're full of all these attachments and regrets. I should have done this, where's, and you go. In other words, it comes down to that, and you don't know where you're going. So you're defeated. then he says, but even if you go to the heavenly planets, and to support that illusion, you have to make so much money, which is, so painful. All right, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to the heavenly planets. And then he says, but even if you go to the heavenly planets, you have to also face there's so many rivals who are trying to get your position. Indra, oh my God, that yogi, he's getting advanced. He sends down some nymph to try to distract him. Vishwamitra, there's several famous. But so Indra's worried, oh, my position, I can't keep my position. Just like these stupid politicians, right? These mundane politicians. How can I get reelected? How can I cheat my way to another term, Pathetic. So therefore, that's not going to work. So it doesn't work on the earthly plane, and the heavenly plane isn't it, And also we learn that just liberation doesn't solve your problem, because that's not who we are. Just merging into Brahman and becoming one with the white light. Oh, wonderful! No more birth and death. It's a negative pleasure. But what about your loving exchange? What do you want to do with all that? Just I am that I am. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced this. I've talked to people who have the what do they call it? The sensory deprivation chamber. Have you ever you been in one? So they have the perfect temperature, right? And you're kind of floating, right? But you came out of it. You're here now, right? In other words, after a while, it says, "Okay, get me out of here." You can only enjoy that because it's like relief from what, right? It's suddenly, there's probably quiet in there with some soft music playing or something, right? But it's limited. So that's like the Brahma Jyoti. That's like liberation. Oh, I'm free. No more birth, no more death, no more old age, no disease. Oh, let me just be. I am that I am. I am that I am. How long can you chant that? No Hare Krishna up there. So you come down. There's a verse about that. Anyway, I won't get into that. So the whole idea is that even if you go to heaven, there's going to be rivals. So the idea is that it's all under the modes of nature. Krishna's watching, he's in control. But he's not, but what is he doing to control? He's supplying intelligence, how to act. He's overseeing, making sure all the material elements are together. In every atom, got to hold everything together. But it's working, material is working under his supervision. You didn't quote this one. Prakriti kriyamani gunai karmani sarvasya. But what about maya jakshena prakriti suyate sasadachara? Krishna says in the 9th chapter, this material energy is producing all these things, and it's going. But I'm overseeing. By supervision, she's doing what she's doing. So now, here's the punchline for the whole thing. We are trying to get in the best graces of Krishna. We are going straight to the top. Now, not that, without intermediaries of the guru, but our aim is for Krishna, nothing less. And so, clearly, since he's in control of even the minutest activities of the material world, if we somehow do some sincere service for him, then he's going to make arrangements for us to continue. He wants us to succeed in this endeavor more than we do. And so, this is why Prabhupada came here and didn't go to, Barbados or somewhere. He came to New York City because that was where, I lived there. And I'm telling you, if he had come a few years earlier or a few years later, it would have been a whole different ballgame. It was just at that point where LSD was going on, which was important because it kind of shook everybody's idea of what reality was and gave you a hint of the divine, all kinds of things like that. So that was happening. And it hadn't yet turned into, the amphetamines, the drug changed and everything changed after a few years. I was witness to it. There was the Summer of Love, 1967. Prabhupada was right in the middle of it in San Francisco. Right in the middle of it. You see the pictures in the movies, he's chanting, like incredible kirtan in Golden Gate Park with Lord Jagannath sitting next to him. They didn't know what they were doing. They brought the deity right off the altar out into the park. Prabhupada is chanting, he's tolerating, and then he told him, no, you don't take the deity off the altar like this. Happened once. The beautiful, there's a movie of it. But he's surrounded by these young people. They came from all over the country, and they were dancing and chanting Hare Krishna. Some of them came back to the temple. Some of them heard Prabhupada. Some of them bought some books. They became devotees. They became West Coast and East Coast, and gradually, it expanded because it's real. But it puts you're in a completely different mindset of what is good and what is bad, what to do, what not to do. And the wonderful thing is you can directly experience by the process of chanting and by the other process of devotional service the hint of that ananda that you're looking for, that doesn't depend on the externals. It's already there in your heart. You have a reservoir of pleasure there. We just have to connect with it. And the process of bhakti does that. So I'm sure that didn't answer your question, but that's where I went with it. You were going to say something.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Okay, we have a question from Danavari.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. My question is that sloka kshine punye mrityu lokam vishanti. They have to come back. You said from the Swarga Loka. In Gita it says that after a while, after so many years.
Yes.
But on other sentence it says devtas want to come back because they are tired, and because it's in Mrityu Loka, in human life, only life we can achieve bhakti. So both are, would you explain like a little bit
Well, I think
opposite?
I think you're mixing two things up. One is the karmavadis who are fruitive workers, but they know about the sacrifices from the Vedas, and they're pious people, and they want to go to heaven, and some of them achieve it. But eventually they have to come back down, just the nature. Then you have the muktivadis who know that it's foolish to try to go to heaven, because that's temporary. So I'm going to go to Brahman, which is eternal. But so that covers another group, and for that is another verse spoken by the demigods themselves when Krishna's in the womb. Ye nyeda vindaksha vimukta maninas tvayasta bhavad avishuddha buddhaya aruha kuchena parang palang tata patanchadho anadvita yushmarangriya. So the demigods were glorifying the devotees. Then they said there are others, ye anye, O Adavindaksha, O lotus-eyed Lord, who think themselves liberated. Very important phrase. Vimukta manina. In their mind they feel liberated. And these Adhuha kritrena. Kritrena means a very difficult austerities. To try to negate all the senses and quiet the mind and control. Many don't achieve it, but a few do. They rise up to Brahman from that, if they can control those senses and the mind for something. So they rise up. Param Padang means like Brahma Bhuta. All right, they're in the Brahman platform, but they're not in Goloka Vrindavan. So what are they? What's their experience? No variety. This is the Nirvishesha that Prabhupada is saving us from. Nirvishesha means no varieties, just uniform white light. But what is there is freedom from birth, old age, disease, and death. So they're there. I've made it. But parang padang tata patantyado. But they fall down from there because it's artificial. We are not just consciousness. We're persons. We have spiritual hands, feet, everything, desires, form, activities. And if you deny all that for the impersonal realization, then eventually it gets boring up there. And you'd rather come down here and start some hospitals or do something so that you have some interaction. So that's that verse. There's two different categories. Neither of them stays in their position because it's not back to Godhead. That's why Krishna says, Yad Gatva Nanabhartante Dhamma Paramang Mama. You have to come to my Dhamma, Goloka Vrindavan or Vaikuntha. Then you don't have to come back. You get reinstated in your eternal position. That's what we're aiming for. Okay, can I take Dimitri's question?
Yeah, go ahead. So Prabhu, quickly, you said there's no birth and death in Brahmalok?
It's a platform of deathlessness, but it's not the place where you're not going to die. You fall down from there, but it's not like because you don't have any material body. You're just there in your pure spirit, but you're repressing all of your natural activities and desires for Krishna. You're denying the reality of Krishna. This is Mayavad, which is death for the soul, really, for bhakti certainly. That's why.
So where Brahma stays is a Brahmalok?
Brahma Loka, you sometimes called it the Brahman effulgence. Think of it as the Brahman effulgence. It's not Brahma's planet. You understand what I'm saying?
I see.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Brahma's planet.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Dimitri, I'm ready.
Oh, thanks. You were talking about devotees bringing out deities to the park.
Yeah.
And I just thought of a really nice story, like a pastime, about how Lord Jagannath, the first deity, came to Srila Prabhupada. And
Okay.
I was gonna, ask you if you could tell that story, because I think it's a really wonderful story.
So he's, yeah, that's quite a story. So the first temple in San Francisco on the West Coast, and some of the main devotees, there were Mukunda and Janaki, Malati and Shyamasundar. They were like the heart of it. And of course, Jayananda was there. He was the beating heart also. So this was it was the 60s, and how to survive. Part of surviving is learning how to be very innocent and shoplift a little bit here and there. So she went to one store, an import store, and there was this big barrel of imported figurines from India. And the barrel was filled with little Jagannaths and little Balarams and little Subhadras, as far as I can understand. So what did she do? It was from India, so maybe Swamiji would know what it's all about. So she pocketed one very innocently and brought it back, this size, this big, small. So she says, Swamiji, what is this? And she put the little Jagannath down on the desk, and Prabhupada immediately offered his obeisances. Everyone was shocked. What is this? That doesn't look like Krishna. So then Prabhupada explained, this is, Jagannath from me. And then, are there others? What about Balaram and Subhadra? So he says, yes, there's a whole barrel, Prabhupada. We'll see if you can get the others. Now, it doesn't say, and I don't know if she shoplifted the others, but anyway, she came back with the other two. And that was, the first deities. And if I recall, then they became like talismans. Devotees would wear them around their, in little bags, But the main thing is that Prabhupada said to Shyamasundar, who was a skilled woodworker, that can you carve big ones of these? And he says, oh, sure. So he did that. I'm not going to tell the part where he's smoking cigarettes. That's not part of it. But after some days, he had bigger, and they became the first deities. And that was the first Rath Yatra in a truck, Prabhupada was ill. He had gone back to New York. He had a little stroke, so he's up to the coast a little bit. And so they had the Rath Yatra. They just drove down to the beach, I think, with it. They must have given out prasadam, a lot of prasadam. And then they drove up to visit Prabhupada. They explained what happened. He was very happily heard about the first Rath Yatra. So that was how Jagannath came to America. And for a long time, the only Rath Yatra was in San Francisco. It wasn't thought that we could put any others on. But I'm not sure if the first one outside of San Francisco was the LA Rath Yatra, but that was a big deal. At first they didn't want to do it. The leader didn't want to do it. It was such a big, thing. But Jayananda was in LA. I was there at the time. This is 77, before Prabhupada disappeared in the summer. And actually, he left his body right before Nrsimha's appearance day. You'll notice in the calendar every year. And he was, although the leader there was not into it, he was into it. And he was calling up, making arrangements for delivering the wood and planning it out and everything. And it became kind of a fait accompli, and all the devotees were expecting it to happen. Said, okay, we'll do a first Rath Yatra. And it was a huge success. They had a little elephant right on Venice Beach. I swear, the first two, they had an elephant. Alice Coltrane, who was a famous name. I don't know if you know jazz. She was there singing. So it was quite an experience. And that Rath Yatra has been, amazing over the years. Of course, this last year we couldn't do it. And you experienced a little flavor of it on Whiteside Avenue. Okay. We have to close with a poem. Is that okay? Or we're going to ask a question?
You talked about the effect of Prabhupada's chanting. When you heard it, you used a word that sounded like salutary or salvatory, the effect he had when you heard it.
Salutary effect?
Yeah,
Did I say it like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting word, and it's describing the effect of hearing him chanting. And so I was
well,
wondering
that
if you could
means
describe
beneficial. I don't remember using that word, but it had a tremendous effect because chanting of a pure devotee is transformative. And even though you may not know how it's transforming you, one of the things that was a far-out experience. Let me come back and try it again. In other words, it kept the interest up. You had a transcendental experience from the first time you come, if you hear, and especially if you chanted, which was like an easy thing to do, you know. That the whole point is everyone was experimenting. They were experimenting with drugs, this and that, you know, and this was another experiment with music. And so Prabhupada didn't, you know, he emphasized the chanting very much at that early point because he saw that was the hope that they could be, and it worked, you know. But he also wanted the books because it found it, you know, the foundation of your faith, so you'll keep going through the difficulties, you know. So they both work together. All right, still time for one poem. Let's see. Okay, here's a little meditation on entering Vrindavan with Krishna and Balaram. He says, Vrindavan's rivers, lakes, and hills ring out with charming hums and trills as flocks of birds and maddened bees rejoice among the flowering trees. To those idyllic woods and glades repairs Govinda with his friends, Sri Rama and the cowherd boys, to taste the most exquisite joys. And as they walk along the way, absorbed in herding and in play, Sri Krishna, beauty absolute, begins to blow his mystic flute. With peacock plume upon his head and fragrant flower on each ear, he enters Braja's wood with tread sublime, a dancer without peer. His golden yellow raiment glows, his garland reaches to his knees, and from his lips the nectar flows and fills his flute with melodies. As Krishna thus begins his day with friends who sing his glories sweet, he beautifies the forest way with fine impressions of his feet. Samadhi culminates in this, to always see this scene of bliss within oneself and outside too. May Krishna give this boon to you. Hare Krishna. All right, let's see. Open the curtain. We'll see Krishna in a few minutes.
Thank you
glories
so
to Shri.
much, Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol Dhanabhai. We're missing Vijay. I hope he doesn't have COVID. We can all pray. Hare Bol. He's probably on some pilgrimage somewhere. All right, we'll resume tomorrow with text 28.